Get ready!
Greetings collectors and welcome to today's retro game review. It's time to get back to basics with a much loved franchise from Sega. Over the next 3 episodes I'll be taking a look back at the 16-bit editions of Sega's Outrun series. Specifically, I'll be covering what most regard as the 16-bit Outrun trilogy, consisting of Outrun, Turbo Outrun and Outrun 2019. Now, aficionados will quickly point out that there is actually a 4th 16-bit Outrun title called Outrunners. Rather than making a whole 4th episode, I've decided to simply bundle it in with the 3rd episode in the series. I'll also be excluding the later editions of Outrun, not out of spite, but I feel these deserve their own episodes at a later date. For now, I'm purely looking at the Sega 16-bit editions. So, back to the beginning, and a look at the original Outrun by Sega. Released back in 1986 in the arcade by the legendary Yu Suzuki, Outrun became a phenomenon. The game was released in several formats, including a full sit-down cabinet, with a full complement of wheel and pedals. If you were a child of the 80s, the sight of this cabinet will literally bring back the ringing sounds of the arcade and the smell of the coin-op action. Quite simply, Outrun and Sega had become synonymous with the arcade experience. Outrun was one of an arsenal of games that Sega used to boost the demand for the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis, and it worked like a charm. Outrun, Super Hang-On, Space Harrier, Afterburner, Golden Axe, Altered Beast. My goodness me, what a time to be alive if you were a fan of video games of the Sega variety. This was a real golden age for Sega. Before the 16-bit Sega vs Nintendo wars kicked off in earnest, history clearly records the dominance of Sega's arcade legacy. I grew up mostly with Commodore and Sega as my go-to machines, but I obviously have a healthy respect for Nintendo and what they brought to the party. During the early 90s though, it would be very difficult to separate me from the games library of the Sega arcade conversions though. So when Outrun landed on the Sega Mega Drive in 1991, there was obviously some excitement with gamers after much build-up and anticipation. The result was glorious. We were treated to a very decent conversion of the game. It's bright, bold, beautiful and fast. For all the world, Sega fans the world over celebrated this arcade smash. So, does it still hold up today? In my opinion, absolutely. Much like Super Hang-On, the graphics are very much of the era. They are simple in places, but the consistency and stylisation of the game make this one feel as fresh as ever. For new players, you'll certainly understand why my generation enjoyed this game. For those revisiting, you may just have to wipe a tear from the corner of your eye as the nostalgia kicks in. After you've selected your radio station, it's off to the coastline start. Before you know it, you're tearing through the tarmac and speeding your way into an arcade paradise. It's very satisfying and everything comes together really well as a great example of a truly great game. Just because we now refer to Outrun as a retro game, it really doesn't mean we have to make any concessions here. The game very much stands proud on its own 2 feet and holds its own even today. The controls are easy to get to grips with. In terms of buttons, it's an accelerate brake affair and left and right on the D-pad. The added element of gameplay comes from the gear selection. You'll need to shift between low and high gear to get the most out of the course. On those straights, max out that high gear, but make sure you take the bends with care. There are several schools of thought in the gaming community of how best to play Outrun. Some will try and stay in high gear for the duration whilst tapping the brake for control. Others like myself favour dropping to a lower gear on the corners, the equivalent of compression braking in a real car. Whichever method you use, you'll certainly need to spend some time mastering the course, or should I say, courses. At the end of each stage, you can branch off either left or right, potentially creating a multitude of ways to complete the game. Again, this element of selection also divided speedrunners of the game on the easier versus fastest routes. Whichever route you choose, you will be treated to an array of landscapes as you overtake your rivals in order to hit the next checkpoint. So even if you complete the game, you can go back and try again to see the rest of the countryside. Of course, this wouldn't be a Sega release without some decent packaging. Get ready for it! There it is, just as you remember it, that red Ferrari Testarossa Spider with the Outrun number plate, a most vibrant game cover if ever I saw one. This of course lines up with the manual and the cartridge, as was the style at the time. I've kept mine in minty fresh condition, and holding it is like a portal to a time when Sega could do no wrong. Here in the UK, expect to pay around the £40 to £50 British mark for a mint-in-box copy of Outrun. For a game that was mass-produced, it really has held its own in terms of collectability. The North American version typically sells for around the $30 mark for a decent complete edition. So, for a first outing of Outrun, this was a very strong offering. Sega's key strategy of getting that arcade-to-home conversion right really resonated with gamers. Naturally, we wanted more. Sega fans demanded bigger, better, faster. And my goodness did Sega listen. We would only have to wait until the following year for Sega to up the ante with the next instalment of the series, Turbo Outrun. Tune in next episode to find out what happened next, and could the anticipation for a sequel ever live up to the hype? Spoiler alert, yes, it's awesome. Hello again, I hope you enjoyed today's show and thank you for the view. Remember, you can always comment, like, subscribe and find us on the social media sites below. Happy collecting!